If you want to learn, you have to first listen.
Welcome to episode 24 of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, a podcast to feed our curious minds. I'm Matt O'Donnell, and I want to know who you are. I want to know what you do. I want to know why Quentin Tarantino is trying to seriously make us believe that he's going to retire. I think it's some sort of swerve that's going to happen at some point. I just don't see how he can only make a couple more films and then be like, yep, that's it, I'm done. I want to know what matters to you and why. I've spent the past 15 years as a professional bass player. That means I've covered a lot of miles and talked with a lot of people. I've found that the person deeply interested in a topic is often more interesting than the topic itself, and the bigger picture is found in the details. That makes for a fantastic excuse to share conversations with people who I think are great. I am coming to you today from a slightly revamped version of my studio. I bought a little bit of gear to make some improvements in the past week, and so now there are a couple end tables and bass cases and things behind me. Not that you needed to really know that, however, I'm just sort of reminding myself not to take more than 2 steps backwards. Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, the podcast, has been a real thing for almost a year now, and that means that I've been trying to get a handle on how the seasons flow and how the year will go and things like that, and what improvements I can make next year. One thing that has been detrimental to the podcast is the fact that usually when you are a touring musician, the holidays come up on you real fast. One day you're out there finishing your shows, and then all of a sudden, bam, it's over and it's the holiday season. I got to learn that this podcast is no different than that, but perhaps backwards. By that I mean that it's a good time of year to respect people's time and to know that they're doing cool stuff with their families and friends and themselves and whatever, but that if I don't have episodes banked, which I'm working on now to get us through the holidays and the beginning of the year, let all the Kris Kringle dust settle, if something falls through, it's hard when there's a holiday in the middle of the week, the way Thanksgiving is, to recover from that and pivot and get something else ready. And so this will be a very special episode of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. We're going to do 2 things. The first is that I went out there on the social media outlets and I put out a call for questions. And I'm going to answer 3 of them. And then after that, we are going to go back to part of a conversation that I had for episode 6 with my good pal, Steven Williamson, mix engineer extraordinaire. When we were recording that talk, we taped for a while. We had a long talk, and a bunch of it ended up on the cutting room floor. There were a couple large sections where Steven asked me some questions about myself, and in the interest of making it as concise of an episode as possible, I chose to take that time and feature Steven, and the things that were more about me, I cut out. Therefore, I am reaching back into those raw files and grabbing a chunk of conversation that is about mentorship and how I sort of was led to the concepts and executions that happen in my bass playing in my professional career now. It seemed like a good chunk of conversation to bring into this episode, mostly because of the third question that I'm going to answer. I think it all ties together nicely, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, I was sort of saving some of that extra audio from other episodes for a rainy day. Let's consider today a rainy day, and I'm bringing a little bit of it your way. Oh, hey, in the intro to the last episode, I said that it was almost a certainty that the listener numbers for that episode would push November into being the most listened to month of the podcast so far. That turned out to be very true, and I don't know that I can adequately use words to express how thankful I am for that. I can only hope that I will get to say that again someday, hopefully someday soon, some month soon, I guess. Yeah, some month soon. All right, let's get to these 3 questions that I picked from the decent little handful that came in. The first one's going to be from Tori Halford. I believe Tori came in as a follower of the show with the Kristen Rogers episode. I think that's right. Anyway, Tori, that's Tori with an I, says, you're about to be through the first year of your podcast. What are some of your favorite episodes so far? I am on record as saying that I'm incredibly proud of every episode that's come out so far, and I stand by them all. However, there are enough that I should be able to say, oh, I like these a lot. And the reason that I think that I say that I like these a lot are because they're the ones that when people say, where should I start? And if I don't want to tell them to start from the beginning with episode 1, then these are the ones that I'll tell them to maybe hopefully gravitate towards. The first one I'll mention is Chelsea O'Leary's episode. Chelsea is just such a, at least outwardly, assured person. And by that I mean she has a great sense of self. She has really thought about all the things in her life and presents all of that information with a confidence and a calmness in confidence that is enthralling. If you listen to that episode, that is one of the first times that I am toned differently. I'm definitely sort of being an empath to the energy that she's putting out, and you can hear it in the way that I talk in that episode. Chelsea was an incredible guest, and I was so lucky that she was interested in doing the show, and so that is definitely one of them. The episode previous to this one with Terry Adams is another one for very much the same reason. Terry knows what he's doing in terms of how to be aware of himself, and when you are the kind of athlete that has to do a 3-minute run on a BMX bike, there's a lot of being aware of yourself that is requisite. And so getting to talk to someone that is operating at a level like that and getting under the hood is really what this show is about. And that might be one of the finest examples of that thing happening. There are some great episodes where the guest and myself are kind of working it out, and that's very compelling. But sometimes someone just coming in and slapping it down on the table is really kind of special and cool as well, and Terry definitely did that. Lastly, I think this is a predictable answer for those of you who listen to the show regularly, but the episode with Michael Ruhlman is sort of, I don't know how to put it other than saying a dream come true. I love food. I think that regular listeners will know that. And the two sort of ends of the tongs are in dining and being able to cook for yourself at home. And Michael Ruhlman's writing about both of those things has informed so much of my life in each area. And so the fact that he was willing to do the show and hang out with me for an hour was incredible. I don't know that I'll ever get over that happened to me. So that is a personal one. I like to hope that that one is a great episode, but I also might feel like my own bias is standing in my way. Whatever, it's great. It is great. I'm here to say it. Thank you so much, Tori, for that question. Next question comes from my pal and friend of the show, Alex Kramer. Alex is an exceptional guitar player and singer. He plays in a band with a great friend of mine named Nicole Boggs. Their band is called Dystopian Book Club. Look it up. You won't be disappointed. But Alex asks, in a question that I feel like is engineered to trap me, perhaps. No, not trap me. Just, it's a thoughtful question. And I think that Alex knows me in a way that knows that I'll have a pretty detailed answer to this. Alex says, I'm interested in your take on the Lawrence backlash for sounding like a Subaru ad, and maybe your general take on, quote, music school sounding bands like Wolfpack, Jacob Collier, etc. Alex is referring to the band Lawrence, whose fourth album, Family Business, came out this year, and everything that I've heard of theirs so far is fantastic. I will say I have not done a huge amount of due diligence with it. I need to sit down and listen to the whole thing. I think I've heard every song on it, but not as a full experience, and that is not fair on my part. I should definitely go and check it out. Now, I'm going to qualify this answer by saying that I am open about the fact that my opinions are kind of fluid. They could be different a week and a half from now. Music is an art form where, like, it really hits your soul and your emotions, and those things are kind of in flux, and so the things that are bouncing off of them can also be in flux. So maybe I'm going to answer this in the most Matt O'Donnell wants to know way of all, which is to not necessarily answer the question with more questions, but be a little more circumstantial and try and draw out the essence. I'll start with the second part first, where Alex asks me about music school sounding, quote unquote, bands. The thing with bands like that is that because they have studied music very deeply, they have a great grip on it. And because of that, and I should include myself in this as a music college kid, you get an ability to break music down to its most basic parts and understand, as I talked about with Tim Buell back in episode 7, what makes music effective or ineffective, and contrasting that to good or bad music. We, and by we, I mean me, are always trying to think about music as effective or ineffective. And so I think that when you can break productions down and understand why each part fits, you are able to build up effective music very easily and very well, or at least more easily than someone that is just always like writing to the muse. A music school band is going to be able to create something that is polished and, again, I just can't stop saying it, effective to the listener, much easier. Now, I will say that it is rare that lyrically any of that music moves me. I don't think of it as like these high marks of poetry or necessarily storytelling. And an example of that I use all the time is Sweet Baby James by James Taylor. I think that song is like a high watermark of the ability of words to affect the listening experience. I think there are a lot of very good and very clever Wolfpack songs in terms of lyrics, but I don't know that any of them really, hit that for me. Maybe the closest is Wolfpack member Theo Katzman's solo work. I think that he does a pretty decent job of that. And to that end, I think sometimes there are similar sounds that come out of a lot of bands that have come out in the past 15 years or so that are music school bands. I wonder if Lawrence and Lake Street Dive each wrote an EP and recorded what each other wrote but didn't tell anybody. I feel like that would still just make sense. I feel like you would get kind of maybe the same product. And is that bad? Is that good? I don't know, but that's just sort of where I'm at. Now, as for the first part of the question, which was about Lawrence and their video that was on TikTok that sort of became this big controversy for sounding like ad music for something like Subaru or Target or whatever. This was big. If you're not in the music bubble, I don't know, maybe not even in the music bubble, like this was a big discussion for a minute. But I just looked it up before I started answering this question, and the brother and sister that front Lawrence, who are the Lawrence siblings, they are 30 and 27. And so that says to me that the kind of like upbeat, dancey kind of music that has been in ads for something like Target for dorm decorating or whatever is music that would have gotten to them in their most formative years. We've been doing that for like 15, 20 years. And what is more effective than ad music? So I can see them being kids and like really, sponging that kind of stuff up. And it makes sense that then it would kind of find its way into their output. Now, it is totally up to your subjective taste whether or not you feel a certain way about the validity of that, but I think that's it. I think that's all kind of a vague answer, but that is sort of how I feel about both of those parts of the topic. Thank you, Alex, for that question. The last question I'm going to grab is from Sam Byrne, who asked this on Threads. Hey, remember Threads? We all joined it like the week that Instagram, Facebook started the company, and then a lot of people didn't pay attention to it. That platform has actually been very good for, making connections about podcasting and getting the word out there. So Sam is someone that follows me there, and he says, I love the podcast and the way you engage with people. In the intro, you talk about having been a professional musician for a long time. What else would you have done if not music? This is a real tough question. And it's because I have been so certain for so long that I would be a professional musician. The school that I was in when I was in the 8th grade, that was the highest year you could be in for that school. And so those yearbooks, the 8th graders kind of got these profiles that were like senior profiles in a high school yearbook. In it, which maybe someday I will share for some reason, not right now though, because the picture is a picture. In it, it says, career choice. And I said professional musician. In the 8th grade, I had been playing bass for a few months at that point. And I had had music experience before that, as you'll hear me talk about with Steven shortly. But by then, my love of music was such a thing that I knew that it was what I had to be doing. I'm curious how many other people in my class ended up with the career that they put for that. That would be an interesting survey to try and run back through and see what it was like. But yeah, I thought that for that time. Now, that is, the way I feel about it, but okay. I have said to people forever that the only jobs I've ever had are professional music and being a ski instructor. Ski instructing was a great job in high school and the first couple years of college because I could work hard having fun skiing, and make a bunch of money in that season and then live off that, because when you're in high school, what do you need disposable income for? And then that would last almost right about up to when I would start working again. That also allowed me tons of time to practice music and just be playing the bass constantly and all this stuff. However, if I could go back in time, I think I would tell my younger self to go work in a record store. That's just a job that seems like it was made for a young me. I also think I would have learned a lot about great records that I wasn't exposed to naturally if I had done something like that. Plus, if you watch things like Empire Records or High Fidelity, it seems like the kind of thing, that I would be into. So there is a part of me that regrets never having done that at a younger age. Now, also while I was in high school, there was a brief time that I thought that I could work in politics somehow. I know now that that would be a terrible idea. I definitely would not want to do that. But I had a pretty great high school teacher for American history and government who would have real conversations with me about the way that I felt about things. And it made my voice feel very validated, even though we felt very differently about things, but we could have great discussion about stuff. And it made me think, maybe that would be fun to work on a campaign or something. Again, I definitely know that would not be for me now. As an adult, I guess I've thought at different points that I could do some sort of consulting work, maybe in like business or something. Amanda, my wife, gives me a whole lot of credit for being able to take a bunch of information and distill it down into the bullet points of what you really need to know. And that is sort of something that happens when you're evaluating a business. And I could have been maybe useful at that. Now, that is not to say that I think that I could have just jumped into that. There are people that study and work very hard to be in those kinds of positions, and I would have to do that if I thought that I were going to do it. However, I will say that when I'm in a position of leading a band on the road or producing music, that is sort of what you're doing. You are sort of consulting. And so I guess that is what that is. And so maybe in some ways that has become a fulfillment. Thank you, Sam, for that question. And, I had a lot of fun answering questions. And so maybe we'll do that again. I was a little scared of what would come back, but it seemed like the right thing to do to fill out some time. And we'll definitely do that again. I like it. Okay, if we pick up some of the loose threads that came out of that question about what I could have done, I'm going to take you to this talk that I had back a number of months ago with Steven Williamson, my buddy, about mentorship as he asked me about it. And just about 10 minutes of me talking about how I navigated my way into being a better musician and what opportunities I was able to be afforded to be successful. There are some people I don't mention in this, and I think I don't mention them because had it been someone interviewing me legitimately, I probably would have gone through in much more detail, but I was there to talk to Steven about himself, and he sort of craftily turned it around on me. And so it ends up being a little more conceptual than detailed. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention 4 guys. The first is bass educator extraordinaire Jim Stinnett, who is no longer with us. I studied with Jim formally for about 6 years, from the time I was finishing high school through a year or so after I finished Berklee. Jim was one of the most well-respected educators there was, and it's a gigantic hole left in the bass world that he is no longer with us to share things. I would get nuggets of wisdom and have him orient me in the right direction all the way up until the time he passed. I will forever be thankful for what he gave to me. The next person is before that a little bit, or concurrently with the beginning of that, and that is a man named Bjarni Nermo. Bjarni was a bass player in the area where I grew up while I was in high school. He had studied with Jim and also went to Berklee, and I hadn't taken lessons, like real bass lessons, with anyone before I got accepted into Berklee. I was mostly self-taught up to that point. But I knew that I would probably embarrass myself if I didn't sort of get the lay of the land from someone who had done it beforehand. So I spent about 6 months taking lessons with Bjarni, and that was very helpful in getting me to Jim and to an understanding of what would be expected of me in the beginning at Berklee. And then also there are a couple of Berklee professors who are less bass focused, but were exceptionally important to my development. They are Ken Zambello and Mark Shalansky. I should have Ken and Mark on the podcast someday. I think that would be really cool to talk about them and also to, sort of revisit the things that have been swimming around in my head for almost 20 years because of them. I learned so much about maturity in music from them. I learned about things that I probably would have never heard otherwise. And I learned a bit of really great stuff about playing with other people from them. they are just as valuable as anyone to me. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I mentioned them because really nobody gets mentioned by name in this clip. But now I'm going to take you to that talk with Steven Williamson. I will see you on the other side.
Did you have any mentors playing bass?
For a long time, I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I just kind of...
Is it because you're left-handed?
That's why.
So nobody could.
No, nobody could.
Tell you anything.
The only mentors I had were the Muppet musicians because they all played left-handed. There was a time in my 20s when I was insufferable.
Same.
Yeah, I imagine that you and I, but if we had met in our 20s,
gosh,
would have just been awful. I mean, like,
yeah.
I don't think we would have been good for each other.
No.
And I also think that if we had gotten along, we would have like scorched earth.
Oh,
anyone we came across.
Without question.
Yeah. I see as a mark of maturity that I am able to admit that me in my 20s was just what a punk.
Yeah.
But also then do I have to ask the meta question of am I more insufferable now because I feel like I have that understanding?
Because you're self-aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I used to really suck. Now I can just tell you that I used to suck and give you a much more nuanced version of how that is with all the things I've learned since then. But in my 20s, I got tired of telling people that my mom, was just very adamant about me being left-handed. And so, my first bass for Christmas was left-handed and I just picked it up and played. I didn't know any better. I didn't know that I'd be $20,000 in instruments further along than a lot of other people I know just because of access to instruments. But I would tell people that for a long time. And then in my 20s, I got tired of saying that. And I love the Muppets. And so I just started telling people that I played left-handed because the Muppet musicians played left-handed and I wanted to be like them.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't?
Yeah. What a smart ass. Maybe it's whatever level of musical aptitude that I started with, that I innately had.
Yeah.
Or the fact that I was playing bass and I played clarinet before I played bass. So I did
not know that.
Yeah. So I had like music training under my belt. So, people say to me all the time, like, non-musicians, like outside of the professional world, they'll say, well, you can like play anything, right? And my answer to that is like, yes and no. Like, yes. And I always say yes. But the reason that I can say yes is because it is about understanding music and then learning or figuring out how to physically wrangle notes in a certain order out of this instrument.
Yeah.
And, so like, is it going to be good? No. But like, I could figure out how to make most instruments make the noise that I want at the pitch that I want to come out. So in that case, I can play anything, but again, in talking around being around studio musicians, it's like, no, I cannot. No, I could not. No, I could never dream to.
Right.
But I say that to like illustrate being like, so I played clarinet for a long time, so I understood how melody and rhythm worked.
Yeah.
And so then I was just able to apply that to the bass. But being a bass player, there are all kinds of jokes about how like, kids start taking bass lessons and then like they go to 2 and then the third one they cancel because they have a gig,
Yeah.
And which I also say to people all the time when they talk about playing bass, and I say it is the easiest instrument to get to a point where you can play along with a band and be proficient. And then it is, I believe, the hardest instrument to like really get happening.
It is so hard.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful instrument.
Yeah.
But people don't realize, no, you might hear the notes I play, but you don't hear the ones I don't.
Yeah.
And it's the magic of when not to play, pocketed with a drum kit, and the kick drum especially.
Yeah.
That, oh man, what a wonderful, I should have been a bass player.
Yeah. There are so many decisions. I mean, and that's the thing too. Like there is technically being able to play the bass, and then there are all the musical decisions you have to make while playing the bass. Like you're talking about being pocketed with the kick drum, and it's like, there are just as many times where it's like, no, don't pay attention to the kick drum at all.
Yeah.
Like stay far away from that, which was good for me and bad for me at times. Yeah. In high school, through high school, I was very lucky to be able to, I went to Catholic school, so we had a lot of masses and prayer services and all these things that required some music. And I was very lucky enough that I got to play with just a piano player, with just our music teacher. She would give me any excuse to just be playing the bass.
Yeah.
What that didn't do for me is that it made the amount of times I was playing with a drummer the minority of the situation. And so I still to this day very often play bass lines, or like not lines, but like when I will quote unquote fill, I'll like play a rhythm like with the vocal.
Yeah.
Like I'm like creating like a counterpoint to the vocal. And it's just because I'm so used to playing hymns and things like that, where there's tons of that going on. And so that's one of the like places that I had like excelled in for a long time. Then going to Berkeley, I have no shortage of great things to say about that experience. One really negative thing I have to say about it is that the bass department at the time that I was there there was no one good at telling bass players how to play with drummers in any department.
Interesting.
The bass department, you weren't working with drummers. Like you were just doing technical stuff. You were reading, you were doing, like learning different kinds of bass lines, all these things. And then you would go to ensemble classes, and those ensemble teachers were, managing a whole band, and no one ever told me, even great ensemble teachers I had, no one was ever telling the bass player and drummer to like get this like kick drum and like bass thing together. And because I didn't come from that, like I was coming from a position where I played very little with drummers, and then no one was helping me develop that. When I moved to Nashville, I didn't have that together very well.
Interesting.
And, I blew a couple like early gigs, like by not having that, like being put in positions where I was with much older, much more accomplished players, and then just not doing it, know? And then I played a ton of gigs where I didn't know the songs very well, like, cover gigs, or not that I didn't, or I wouldn't know the songs very well to start. And so I would have to, start by being like, okay, I'm just going to play with the kick drum, like starting to understand that principle, and then like building it back from there. And then now, probably in the past, I'd say 6-7 years of time, I don't know, longer than that. I mean, that's some of my own like self-deprecation, being like, I've only recently figured out, because when you play an instrument or mix or do, so many of these things that are never-ending pursuits of continued excellence, you always feel like I'm only just now starting to figure this out, but you've been doing it for a long time. I think back to like playing with the artist Sean McConnell, and it's like I still like hear tapes of that tour sometimes, and I'm like, oh, like I sound like quite good there, and I'm doing both. I'm doing good melodic sense and also good like playing with a drummer sense, and that's 10 years ago now. So it's like I've had that together, better. But just being able to incorporate both of those things, of understanding what's going on around me and also doing the like very basic play with a kick drummer.
Yeah.
Thanks again to Steven Williamson for taping that with me back a bunch of months ago. Thank you for listening to it. You can find the show on Instagram. That is at Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. You can find my own page on Instagram. That is at Matt O'Donnell. If you want to submit more questions, and I'll answer them on the air like I did today. On the air? Am I on the air? On the webs? On the whatever. I will answer questions, comments, concerns that you send in to mattodonnellwantstoKnow@gmail.com. You can also write in to request a sticker. I'll just send it to you. All you got to do is give me your address. Don't forget, like, subscribe, share, comment, rate, whatever. That's all. That's going to do it for this time. Take care of yourself. I hope all the Americans and people who like Americans enjoyed Thanksgiving. Please remember, the best answer to a question is usually another question. See ya.